The FBI just affirmed what I said months ago. Alec Baldwin lied. He pulled the trigger, and now the blame game begins. Everybody seems to be suing everybody else on the set of the movie Rust. But first, before we talk about that, quick reminder. We have a gun giveaway going on. It's happening right now. It's absolutely free. All you got to do is click on that link down below to learn which brand new gun you could win. Okay, so months ago we talked about this terrible tragedy on the set of the movie Rust. What happened was Alec Baldwin holding a firearm, cocking it and pulling the trigger, and I can say that now with impunity because a month-long FBI forensic analysis of that pistol showed that it could not be made to fire. That's very, very important. Guns don't fire by themselves.
I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cocked the gun and I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
They have to be made to fire. That gun could not be made to fire while it continued to be in proper working order. And it was in proper working order when they started their forensic analysis. So, if you remember Alec Baldwin's statement, he was just cheating it to the side and he pulled the hammer a little and he pulled the hammer a little and he let go of the hammer. He never pulled the trigger and the gun went off. Nope, he fired the gun. He had to have fired that gun. He had to have pulled the trigger because the mechanism, the slots on the bottom of the hammer of a Colt Model P single action Army revolver will not let the hammer fall unless the trigger is pulled. The entire system is locked. This hammer can't move forward. I can pull the trigger all day long and nothing happens. I'm pulling the trigger pretty hard right here. That much we knew a long time ago, but the FBI had to do a very serious study, scientific forensic study to prove it because some very serious allegations are on the line right now. This is clearly negligent homicide. Someone was negligent. Alec Baldwin claims it's not him. And the armorer, Ms. Reed, she's now suing the ammunition supplier. I don't know if that means the manufacturer or the supplier, because she claims that the ammunition supplier put live ammo in a box where there were also blanks.
Welcome to the worst day of my life.
What's your job there with them?
I'm the armorer, or at least I was. I'm like the only female armorer in the game and I just fucked up my whole entire career.
Well, as the armorer, shouldn't she be responsible enough to pick up the rounds, look at them and say, live ammo, blank ammo, and load the gun properly? Alec Baldwin, grown-up human being, needs to understand that, hey, he's holding a gun. He should have some training and he should know the status of that firearm. That's one of these cardinal rules. Know the status of your firearm at all times. There are reports in parts of lawsuits that are coming out now that training was offered to Alec Baldwin and he ignored the request for this cross-draw training, which would have ensured that he didn't point the gun at anyone and that he didn't have his finger on the trigger.
There is an information that says he ignored orders not to do this cross-draw and point the weapon at a person or have his finger on a trigger. If in fact that's true, that could be something that proves a lack of due care and circumspection.
Baldwin didn't get this training. Whether or not he refused or ignored, it's going to be some legalese. Everybody is now trying to put the blame on someone else. Well, the way I look at it, there's enough blame to go around. Somebody died here and a whole bunch of people had to mess up. Understand that this is just not one failure. And I don't really believe you should go back and say, well, the first failure began with X, so that's where we're going to talk about this. Nope. If there was a failure at the beginning and another failure the next step and another failure the next step, every person who had a hand in that is responsible for Helena Hutchins' death. She was the director of photography there on the site, and the director also got injured. So not only did we have a death, but we had an injury as well because of a series of negligent acts of terrible safety behavior across the board. And you know what? It ends up with that firearm being in Alec Baldwin's hand, him cocking the hammer and pulling the trigger. Those are the things you need to do to make a gun go bang. That's how you make a gun fire. And Alec Baldwin, who hates guns but certainly wants to use them on his movies, ignored requests to get training. He didn't check the status of the firearm he was handled. Someone said it's cold, so he looked at it and pointed it at someone. It's rule number 1. Don't point a gun at anything you don't intend to shoot. Keep your finger off the trigger until you've made a conscious decision to fire. I could happily go to movie sets and train everybody there in just a couple of hours. What's the daily rate on that? Could I get paid for going to do that? I'm sure that I could. And you know what? I wouldn't let people push me around. No matter who you are, you make sure that safety comes first. Look what happened in this situation. Someone is dead, another person is injured, and now everyone is trying to close ranks and say, it wasn't my fault. If you had a hand on that gun, or a hand on that ammunition, or you were involved in any way leading up to that shooting, you bear responsibility for what happened. The biggest problem that we have with what I will call negligent, some people will call accidental discharge in the firearms community is people not being responsible, not understanding that what they're holding in their hand has the power of life and death, and just assuming that everything's going to be fine. You're holding a gun. When you put a gun in your hand, understand the status of that gun. Check to see if it is loaded. Make sure if there are rounds in the magazine or in the cylinder or wherever they are. Keep the gun pointed in a safe direction and keep your finger off the trigger. Now, all of these things were failed all along the line. And then Alec Baldwin decided that he was going to go on TV and deny that he ever pulled the trigger. He said it over and over again. I didn't pull the trigger. I didn't pull the trigger. He's trying to control the spin and the narrative. Well, now, after months of investigation, the FBI says that gun was working just as it should, which means it cannot be made to fire without the trigger being pulled. So not only did he pull the trigger, he pointed it at someone, and he didn't check to see the status of that gun while they were rehearsing to make this shot. Understand that Alec Baldwin was in a terrible situation. Actually, I feel a little bit sorry for him because nobody should have to go through that. But he wouldn't have had to go through that had he gotten training, had he asked questions, had he done all the things that a responsibly armed American is trained to do from age 12 on when we take our hunter safety classes. You know, all of us who own guns, we went through hunter education courses, typically at age 12, and those are the first things they taught us to do. Make sure we knew the status of the gun, make sure we didn't point it at anybody, make sure we knew what the backstop was, make sure we didn't have our finger on the trigger until we were ready to shoot. They gave us those 4 rules. They're simple gun safety rules. And when you hear people talk about being involved in a gun safety organization, unless that organization is providing safety training classes, it's not a gun safety organization. It is a gun control organization. So all of this is terrible. Helena Hutchins is still dead. She's going to be dead forever because of all the mistakes that stacked one upon the other, because people just didn't follow the basic safety rules that every responsibly armed American should follow at all times. This should be training taught in our schools. This should be taught to people very early on. We have millions of guns in this country. Everybody should understand the gun safety rules and everybody should follow them. Safety is all of our responsibility. Want to know the 3 biggest mistakes when carrying a handgun? Then click on the video next to me to reveal all 3 mistakes. Mistake number 2 may shock you. Click this video right next to me